So the Fairey Rotodyne. I've had these set around for some decades now, and I've decided to bite the bullet and build one. Oh dear. This one is around the early 70s, 73, 74. And I think this one is the mid 60s. The Rival one, I've no idea. But I do know, after seeing them thoroughly, that the Airfix one is the better option. Now I'm just going to give you a quick comparison overview of both kits, bearing in mind that the Airfix kit is in 172 scale and the Rival kit is in 178 scale. As you can see, the Rival decals are better than the Airfix offerings. The Airfix, nice fine surface detail. For a kit this age, when it first came out in 1959, it's pretty good, compared to the Rival's more robust surface detail. The wings, slightly different sizes of course. The Rival's rear exhaust detail looks very suspicious to me. I think it's wrong. The Airfix transparent parts leave a lot to be desired, next to the Rival ones. The Rival props, they come in two parts, whereas the Airfix ones are hewn from one lump of plastic. But the Airfix one is more accurate. One of the main differences between the Airfix and the Rival kit is that Rival has a central tailplane offering, as well as the angled end tailplanes. Rival's main rotors have more detail at the roots, but the tip jet units look very suspicious, very odd. So I'll quickly show you both instructions. I was toying with the idea of replacing all this fine raised detail and then using the riveter tool to replace it. But then I think rivet detail on a civvy job looks odd. But before I do all that, I'm just going to glue some of the main parts, i.e. the wings, engine nacelles and parts of the rear tail. Before I glue the two halves of the nacelle together, I'll show you the folding landing gear. So I start by sanding all the detail off using 280 grit, and I've finished it off with 600 grit. Here's a before and after. You can still see where the detail was even after sanding. Part of the moulding process, I suppose. Next I'll close up the door and add the clamshell doors to each of the fuselage halves. As you can see, a lot of gaps to fill here. I'm also closing off all the undercarriage doors. Have you seen the size of those injector pin marks? We're going to need a bigger file. So with all the coarse sanding finish, any fine or small gaps left over, I filled in with liquid plastic. One thing I must do, in case I forget, is transpose the shape of those elliptical windows onto some Tamiya masking tape. These will need to be cut out at some stage and used as masks. Now before I add the transparent windows to the side of the fuselage, I need to make sure that they protrude slightly on the outside of the fuselage. This makes sanding off the areas around where the transparent parts would seat. So as you can see, there's quite a few gaps around the windows. So just for speed, I'm going to use squadron putty here. So I'm just adding a layer of paint here along these windows. This will show up any imperfections. The slightest gaps or scratches will show up. Once all the imperfections are dealt with, I've used a couple of polishing pads just to finish off the surface. Now there are some serious imperfections on the inside of these windows, only on some of them, and it would take quite a bit of effort to get rid of these because they're that deep. I'm hoping a couple of coats of Johnson's Pledge will tone these down a bit. So now I'm happy that the outside windows are nice and flush, no imperfections. I've cleaned the surface thoroughly with water, dried it thoroughly, and then given it a very thin coat of Johnson's Pledge. I'll let that dry under cover, and if need be, I will give it another coat. While I was in the right frame of mind, I decided to have a go at cutting out all those window masks. This was accomplished after an hour of yoga and a brand new scalpel blade. So I'm going to assemble all the rear tail units now, and the Airfix kit has the outer tail units in the vertical position. In reality, these do pivot outwards and pivot back. Before I go any further, I want to create a sense of interest through those big windows. Something quick and easy. It doesn't have to be anything special. So I've drawn a very quick guide using the side of the fuselage to help me place the seats and some of the passengers. This gives me all the angles and the heights for the seats. So this is scanned in and the artwork is drawn up and some of the images of faces are placed on them. So once I was happy with the artwork, I've then copied it and mirrored it for the other side. You can see here that I've moved some of the faces around just to make it different. So while I'm on the computer, I've scanned in the decals to create some new ones. Now looking at photographs of the Rotodyne at the 1958 Farnborough Air Show, it doesn't seem to have the actual Fairey crest, the emblem, the logo. So thankfully I don't have to create that. The font I'm using is Rockwell, with just a few adjustments here and there. It's the closest I could get without actually recreating the whole thing. Now talking of the old decals, you can sometimes get rid of that yellowing. I left one of these sheets in the windowsill for about a week and you can see how that yellowing is starting to fade away. It doesn't always work, but you've always got to bear in mind that you still have to broach that fact that these may all fall apart when you add water to them. So the new decals are printed out. I've sealed them all in with a Tamiya gloss varnish, and I did a couple of colours, a couple of shades of blue. So what I have to do now is when I come to paint the blue on the Rotodyne is make sure I match it close enough to one of these decal sheets. So I'm painting the inside of the fuselage half black. It doesn't have to be anything special. You're not going to see any imperfections through those transparent parts. So the passenger seat artwork is glued onto some card and then painstakingly cut out, and from that the cardboard can be painted black. Next, the cockpit area, very basic. I've also decided to replace the pilots. I know they have bone domes, let's just say that these are test pilots. I've also modified the glare shield and also added a scanned image of the actual Rotodyne cockpit panel. So with the cockpit area finished, I've started to add the cardboard silhouettes. I've braced them with some plastic card just to make sure that they don't fall about inside when I close the fuselage halves up, which is what I'm going to do next. Well, some very nice gaps here to take care of. The canopy is not the best of fits, quite a few gaps here as well. No rest for the wicked. Before I start broaching these problems, I've covered all the areas that I want to protect from dust and any crap floating around. So because of the size of the gaps, I've used plastic card to fill the rear end. What? And I've used strips of plastic card for the gaps at the front. Once they've been trimmed, I've used liquid plastic to fill up the smaller gaps. The nacelles finished off and then added to the wing. Not a bad fit here. So the fuselage has all been sanded along with the wing assembly. I'll add a coat of paint just to spot and check for any issues. Now that I'm happy with the finish, I've masked off the canopy area. I've also paid attention to the main rotor mount by adding a sleeve. The inner rod will be attached to the rotor hub later on. So now I can glue the wings and the tail planes on. So with everything cleaned up, I can start finishing off the masking. So I need to hide all this patchwork up, especially around the areas that are going to be painted silver. But my first coat is going to be grey for the cockpit area, the frame areas. Now I'm going to add the Tamiya white, making sure I get a nice solid coat for all the white areas. So with the white all masked off, I have a decision to make. Do I use Vallejo's or AK's silver? AK's is a better finish, but I'm painting over an acrylic, and even though I've let it dry for quite a while, it could cause me issues. I'm going to go for the AK's. I should be okay. So let's clear all this off, ready for that final colour, blue. It dawned on me pretty quickly that I forgot to do the white areas on the engine nacelles. This Rotodyne needs a go faster stripe on it. I was too busy looking at the Airfix paint guide. So I created some artwork, cut it out and married it up against the engine nacelle. Once I was happy with it, I did a few more. This artwork will be used as a template to cut out the masks. So with more masking again, I've applied the white for a second time. So let's start again. I can mask off now, ready for the blue. So after quite a few hours of masking, I can't make heads or tails of what's going on here in what I have or haven't masked off. I'm hoping I've covered all the relevant areas. One thing to note, that there's a white pipeline on the engine nacelles. I've managed to do the outside ones, but the inside ones I couldn't quite get at. They were too difficult, so I've left them off. So I've decided, looking at it, XF8 for the blue looks pretty close. Or so I thought. It was only when the XF dried I could see that it was too vivid, even with all that masking still on. So I've decided to create a mix and adding quite a bit of XF23 to XF8. This mix is applied, giving me a warmer, lighter blue. So with the blue dry, I've just peeled off a small area just to see where that colour blue looks okay against the white. Yeah, that looks much better. So all the masking peeled off, which was a task in itself. And of course, there are some retouch-ups to do here and there. So I left the paint to dry for a few days, and now I can start to add the decals. Now with this silver paint surface, I should have no worries about any silvering, he says confidently. But the decals on the white surface, I may get some issues. So with that, I use a wet polishing cloth just to prep the white surfaces. So to seat the decals down, I've used Tamiya's Mark Fix Strong. Gave me no issues whatsoever. So I'm going to seal everything in now with several light coats of Tamiya satin varnish, but before I do that, I'm just going to go over the damp cloth around the decals to wipe off any residue. So the next thing I need to do and wanted to do was to break up those large slabs of white and silver. So I've cut some pieces of cardboard paper. It's just thick paper, that's all it is. I can create edges using pastels or graphite lead. You could use oils, but at this scale it may be too much. These effects need to be very subtle. So you get the basic idea. I'll do the same for all the silver areas now. So the props have been painted, but they also seem to have an anti-abrasion guide on them. I think that's what it is. But the thought of masking all those fine areas off on those weak blades made me wince. So I decided to paint a strip of Tamiya masking tape, cut to width and then cut into lengths. This is then carefully placed on the edge of the blades. And for me, it seemed to do the trick. So the rotor blades, very basic and not at all accurate, other than that tip jet unit, which are better than the Rival offerings. These are painted aluminium, and then the trailing edge is masked off and painted light grey. Once the grey is dried, I've dragged a dry sanding sponge across the paint. Last thing I did was cut out a cardboard template and then using a fine pencil create some panel lines across the blades, just to add a bit of interest. So now all I've got to do is add the final parts: props, rotor, rear tail braces and the exhaust. So at last I can say I built an Airfix Rotodyne, another notch to whittle on my workbench. If you want an accurate Rotodyne from this kit, quite a bit of work and time are required, especially around that rotor head and those blades, although there are other issues. But I've got to remember that this kit is 60 years old, even older. There were no CAD models in those days, although that doesn't guarantee anything these days. but one thing's for sure, no one can argue that it doesn't look very much like a Rotodyne. So I want to thank you for watching, and I do hope to see you for the next video.